You okay?
Fantastic. Very, very good. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you being here. You look like you're in the tropics, so that's nice. So I'm just going to do a very quick intro and then hand it over to you so we get to hear your words for as long as possible. For those of you joining on Zoom, also, I'll just give you a quick overview. This is CASA Pitzer. This is our community center in Ontario. These lovely students and staff here are all part of the CASA program, which stands for Critical Action and Social Advocacy. We are a community-based research and community engagement, social justice-oriented program at Pitzer College. So we have this lovely community center, and we also have these students who are part of a cohort taking 2 classes together, critical community studies and community-based participatory research with 8 different justice nonprofit organizations we work with in the region. So that's all of us. And we have here Taj James, who is a wonderful collaborator in the work for love and justice in our world and transformation, personally, interpersonally, systemically, in all the ways. Taj was co-founder and director of the Movement Strategy Center, and also involved with Thrive Beloved Community Network, and also with Spectrum Capital. I will let him tell you a little bit more about perhaps the trajectory of those particular ways in which he engages in transformation and social justice work. But we are really grateful to be with you here today, Taj, and we're just sad that your daughter did not choose to go to Pitzer College. But aside from that, we understand why Cal Berkeley went out. We would probably be there too. If I had gotten accepted, I definitely would have gone there. I was on the wait list. But anyways, sending much love and gratitude for you being here with us today. And we're just going to hand the mic over for you to talk about really what you wish as it relates to these ideas around building transformative movements for deep democracy and beloved community.
Thank you. It's good to be with you. And I have to say it was a hard decision for my daughter Kiyomi, in large part because of this conversation we're having, that Pitzer is a place where students like you go so that you can engage in these kinds of questions and think about what might be required to create the world that we deserve, that a world in which we all can thrive. So yes, good to be with you. Just a little bit on my journey and kind of how some of what you read, if you had a chance to read it, how that kind of came about. So I grew up in Southern California. I was sort of a movement baby. My parents were involved in the social movements of the late 60s and early 70s, and so that's the context in which I kind of grew up. And for my parents, they were also like very deeply spiritual people. So the work of like systems change and social transformation, and the work of kind of honoring the sacred, those were in my home. They were one thing, not 2 different things. And so so as a young person, I was very aware of and interested in how to make the world a more fair, just, and loving place. And by the time I went to college, I thought I was going to be a philosophy and religious studies major, and I ended up Black studies and cultural anthropology major. When I got to college, I was told the things that in my family were 2 things, were one thing, were 2 things, and those 2 things were in conflict with each other. The work of the spirit and the work of justice were not the same, and I had to choose one or the other. So I kind of sort of abandoned my spiritual roots, and I kind of focused on community organizing and studying social movements and how to transform systems of power and domination and all that good stuff. And became a community organizer. And after kind of going down that path for a while, what I experienced was that that a lot of the progressive movements for social justice, the way that we did our work did not reflect the values of the world we said we were trying to create. We were not very nice to each other or ourselves or anyone else for that matter. It sort of felt more like a circular firing squad than a movement for justice and liberation. And something seemed pretty fundamentally wrong with how we were approaching things. So I kind of had a little bit of crisis there, and I was like, I thought I knew a lot of things, and now I feel like I don't know anything. So I had to kind of go back to square one. So I sort of had to go back to my roots, because my feeling was that like the things that got split in me, and I kind of think about this as like Fannie Lou Hamer versus Kwame Ture. So the split between civil rights and Black power, right? So the civil rights movement that was sort of rooted in the Black church and Black spirituality, and a Black power movement that was rooted in an Afrocentric, African-centered, anti-communist, anti-capitalist left, right? That there was a split there, and so I was feeling in myself the need to try to grapple with that split, and so like went to a Buddhist monastery in France. I went to South Africa, tried to figure out what to do, and then sort of came back and started the Movement Strategy Center, and with sort of three questions. The question of like, do we know what we wanted? Because in the early 90s, progressive movements were really clear about all the things we were against. We were fighting Prop 187, Prop 209, Prop 27, like fighting against a lot of in California right-wing ballot initiatives to like end affirmative action and like deny immigrant children access to education and all kinds of other horrible things. And so we're fighting against a lot of things, and it wasn't clear to me what we wanted, that what our transformative vision, what our compelling, exciting vision for the world was. So the question was like, do we have a vision? Do we know what we want and not just what we don't want? Can we build collaborations that are powerful enough to achieve that vision? And can we do the work in a way that reflects the values in our vision? So those were the three questions I started with. I didn't have any answers, but I knew the questions I wanted to explore, and I wanted to explore those questions with other people interested in transformation, interested in justice, who wanted to try to figure that out together. And the readings that were shared with you were essentially kind of the things that we learned over about 20 years of exploring those questions, if the change that we seek, if the vision that we have requires transformation and not just change. So change is like small caterpillar, big caterpillar. Transformation is caterpillar, butterfly. And in a lot of the social change work we were doing, it was like small caterpillar, big caterpillar. But that wasn't really going to fundamentally shift outcomes for people in the planet. Like we needed a more fundamental transformational approach. And if that is what we needed, that there were there were some essential elements to that process, and that's a bold vision, knowing radical imagination and bold vision, having the courage to dream and believe that another world is possible, and to be very specific about what that world might feel like, taste like, look like, smell like, to sort of dream big and to sort of animate that vision in some nuance and detail, so that we can kind of taste it. Deep embodiment, which is this notion that, like, if we want that future to come, we have to be living expressions of that future in the present. It has to come from the inside out. And we have to find a way to cultivate that future within ourselves, and to live and practice that future in our daily life and in everything that we do. And then we have to build, connections that are deep enough, relationships that are powerful enough to hold each other and to hold the energy required to transform systems. And with those three things, vision, embodiment, connection, that creates the possibility of transformative strategy, the ability to sort of navigate creatively and flexibly and effectively towards the future that we want. So those kind of, just in some ways, like, wow, it took you 20 years to figure that out. They're just very, very basic elements, very, very basic principles. And what I find to this day, anytime I'm in relationship or conversation with any social change communities, is like their effectiveness is directly related to their ability to deeply practice those four things. And where people are struggling is where they're struggling around one of those things. So it's very simple, but it continues to be a very useful way for me to understand within myself and the work that I'm doing, and with the partners that we work with, kind of where more focus and attention might be needed to generate a fruitful way forward. So that was kind of the part of the initial foundation, and then from there, in bringing the movement leaders together that we work with, who work from reproductive justice to health justice to ending mass incarceration, to working on a lot of different issues in a lot of different sectors at Movement Strategy Center. And we brought those leaders together over a series of innovation labs called transition labs. And the thing that lab process was focused on was this question of, like, how we transition from a world organized around violence, domination, and extraction to a world organized around resilience, interdependence, and interconnection, or love, care, and community. So this notion that King offered us, that, like, our current society is organized around these triplets, these three core values of racism and dehumanization, greed, extreme greed, and militarism. And that those are the three core values in our system. And that what's required for transformation is a radical revolution in values and a shift towards the values of beloved community. So kind of holding that question, bringing that question forward from King and from Grace Lee Boggs and from other folks who've been holding that question of how we bring about a shift in fundamental values in worldview that would make possible a shift in political, cultural, and economic systems. So that was the exploration that the transitions community process undertook. And what became very apparent in that process very early on was the recognition of this sort of like what happens as bell hooks asked, at sort of the intersection of power and pain. So when we think about movement building and transformation, the dominant way of thinking about that is that it is a power building project, that harm and systemic inequality is a reflection of systemic imbalances in power. Imbalances of power from the global north to the global south, across the color line, across the binary gender spectrum, right? That structural and systematic imbalances in power produce structural and systematic harm, violence. So if you're involved in transformation work, you're building power to balance power, right? To address those conditions out of which harm occurs. So the challenge is the people doing the power building and everyone else is in a lot of pain. Is in a lot of pain and has experienced a lot of trauma because of that harm. So it can kind of sometimes in social movement culture be this like either or question of like, do we need to heal first and then build power? Or do we need to build power first to stop the conditions that are creating the harm that we need to heal from? And then we're healing from the harm that happened ancestrally and last week and last month and last year and 500 years ago. And then we have to heal from the harm that's happening today and then the harm that's happening tomorrow. And how do we build power when there's so much healing to do, when there's so much happening at this intersection of power and pain? So that kind of emerged in the transitions community as the kind of central like puzzle or place that the movement kind of felt stuck, because people were trying to sort of resolve it in a kind of a binary way. So as the community kind of worked through that, what the wisdom that kind of emerged was about what it looks like to sort of hold those questions together and to think about the ways in which the work of healing and repair at an individual level, at a family level, at a community level, that pathway into collective healing and collective repair and reparations and the repair of structural and historical harm, and the importance of the work on that pathway alongside the work of reconnecting to our sense of power individually and collectively, and then structurally, right? And that we've got to always sort of hold those two dimensions of the work together, if transformation is going to be possible. So that's sort of the the sort of the heart of that 20 years of work that I was engaged in. And I'm working, building on those insights. I'm working on a related set of questions right now in the bigger project of transformation, but I think I can sort of pause there and see if that gives us a place to jump from as we hopefully can get into some conversations. So
Taj, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. You somehow summed up like everything in 20 minutes. I don't know how you were able to bring all of that together, but it made perfect sense in my mind. So the students, yeah, have been reading and grappling with your pieces, and we're all excited to talk about them together. So there probably will be questions emerging that will lead you into new places. And we do want to hear, we're all curious, like, how do you connect this to finance and capital and transformation structurally, while also keeping the dance and the embodiment and the healing. We were like trying to imagine white men in suits on Wall Street, like all like doing interpretive dance. We were like, we can't, how's it working? How do those things all come together? So
Well, let me tell you a little quick story on that. It's a short one, but like working with a little story, like working with, for example, like a family foundation, the family board members of which are all women at various ages, right? And you say, okay, we're talking about the philanthropy. Now let's talk about the money that's in your endowment. And all of a sudden the conversation gets really interesting, because it's like, oh my gosh, I need a therapist, because grandpa only let our brothers like deal with the investments. The women were focused on the philanthropy, right? And so now I've got to deal with my grandfather and my brothers and the patriarchy in our family and the conflicts that's happening. So it's both like, I mean, there's so many stories there, but I will just say that like, separation creates harm for everyone. Like we're impacted differently by the violence of separation, but we're all impacted. And so anyone you talk to will have a story to tell, and healing to do about their relationship to the violence that the structuring capital has done. And, stories to tell, but, we'll go wherever you want to go. So what are you all curious about? What questions are arising?
all right, so it's a burning question, like to start us off.
This is kind of just building off. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
I'll just speak loudly. This is just building off this concept that you were just talking about a few minutes ago of the intersection of power and pain. And me and a few other classmates before were talking about how to, in terms of the reading we did that you wrote, how to know when to like protect yourself in moments of dysregulation, stress, anger, fear, etc., and how to know when to kind of like lean on community members or do this deep embodiment work when you're feeling that way. Because just personally speaking, when I'm feeling, I don't know, any negative emotions, it's hard to know when it's like, oh, let me do some mindfulness, or let me do some like deep breathing or embodiment. But those are the times when it's hardest to force yourself to do those things when you are feeling really dysregulated. So I guess if you just have any insight on that, because I think I have a lot of personal struggle with that. And yeah, anything you think.
Yeah, that resonates with me very strongly, personally, as well. I think it is the potential of practice is that when we practice together in moments that are not challenging or overwhelming, that hopefully that energy can sustain us when moments get more difficult and more challenging. And I know for myself that's often not the case. Like my practice often breaks down right when I'm like, wait, where is it? What do I need? And I think, just having compassion with ourselves and each other in that. And I think the and it's different for each of us, but I think it's like the conversation that has matured around the difference between kind of individual healing and collective healing and self-care and collective care. I think there's an important wisdom in that for me, because I know that I have raised in this culture, like there's still the part of me that's like, I should be able to do this. I should be able to figure this out on my own. Like, what's wrong with me that I can't just do this, right? And that's the very moment I need to be in a vulnerable way, reaching out to the people who care about me to say, hey, I'm struggling. I need some support. I need a break. I need some time. I need someone else to take this on for me right now so I can just, so I can be okay. And I think that that's where we can kind of see that our well-being, this is our friend Kelly has a book that came out recently that's about the wellness of we, and how our individual well-being is very much like a collective construct, right? Or our ill-being is a collective construct. And so just I think the hardest thing for us to do in this cultural context, the more we're sort of steeped in the dominant culture, is to build community that's thick enough and like juicy enough and vibrant enough so that someone's all like, so enough people are always doing well enough to hold the other ones who are struggling, right? The balance is like, it's both in ourselves, but it's in like the thickness that we build in our communities and networks. And that is very hard to do because everything about this culture is so hyper individualized. And I think the thing we constantly have to kind of, the habit pattern or the cultural pattern we have to constantly interrupt is that like that sense that we're supposed to do it on our own. We're supposed to figure it out on our own. And there's something wrong with us if we can't. So I definitely feeling you on that one. Which is kind of the idea of beloved community, the idea of like revillaging, the idea that like we're in like relational constructs that are like, I'm supposed to do it, or mom's supposed to do it for me, or my partner's supposed to do it for me. But like the way that my needs are supposed to be met is by a very small number of people. And that is like a very culturally maladaptive thing, right? Because human beings have not thrived for most of our history in that way. That's a very historically recent cultural maladaptation. So the more community we have, the more possibility there is for us to navigate those difficulties well together.
Hi, thank you. I just want to thank you so much for everything that you said so far. I think like so many things are resonating, and yeah, just make a lot of sense. I am kind of wondering more about this. One of the things that you talked about in the very beginning was feeling like being in movement spaces and then feeling these types of like values that we're really trying to shift, like being recreated like within that space. And I feel like that is definitely something that and I'm kind of just speaking for like on campus organizing right now to like make that clear. But yeah, I think that's something that is like really kind of resonating, and like I think especially during kind of like organizing during the pandemic, that became very clear too, of like how where are we extending our like care, and like how far are we willing to go to like really try and include like disabled folks and compromised folks, and and yeah, it's and just being in these kind of radical spaces, yet like really not feeling like values are totally being like I don't know, replicated. And so I guess I'm just kind of curious more to hear like what was your response in those moments? Because again, it's like you can't make someone be accountable or make someone, or like have that kind of like like not having that dominating approach, because it's like, okay, yeah, we're practicing what we're trying to build, but then how do you like respond to that environment, I guess?
Yeah. So beloved community is about like embracing our full and flawed humanity, and it's about the notion that like we are all a sacred and inseparable part of the whole. And so it's a commitment to grapple with ourselves and each other, because the notion that like anyone or anything is disposable or can be thrown away is not rooted in love, because we are each other. We are each other in a really fundamental way, to get a little, go out there a little bit. But yeah, so if that is the truth of who we are and the truth of the interconnected nature of reality itself, then what do we do when we're showing up with all of our trauma, or our fear, or our reactivity, or whatever, or someone else's inability to engaging in ways that are not loving or kind or careful, like with our not knowing, with our ignorance. Yeah, it's really messy. So it's important to find as much grace as we can with ourselves and each other, and to know that we're going to be always striving and aspiring to the values that we hold, and we're always going to be falling short. We are always going to be falling short. So this, which is a way of interrupting, like what I would call, like, if there's one core way to describe dominator culture, is that it's a binary culture. And the thing that that I think our movements struggle most profoundly with is the ways in which, like, progressive movements, justice movements can be very caught in a binary culture. And by binary, I mean like above, below, male, female, black, white, good, bad, right, wrong, right? In which there's the notion that every binary is a spectrum. Every spectrum is a wheel. Each wheel is a web and a spiral, except when it's not. On the road to awareness, default to complexity and paradox. So the project I work on right now is Full Spectrum. It comes out of that poem, which was my attempt to say, okay, we live in a default binary culture. If you understand the nature of reality itself, if you are in direct relationship with reality itself, reality is non-binary. If you have that direct relationship, you will come to know that through that direct relationship. If you are not in direct relationship with reality itself, but in your indirect relationship with your fears, with your thoughts, with your confusion, with your anxiety, right? The culture will reinforce a binary perspective. So that the notion is like, okay, as we are trying to come into direct relationship with reality itself, can we assume that things are complex and paradoxical and very messy? Even if we don't understand that, can we just assume that? Because if we can, it'll open up some space for us to be in relationship with ourselves and each other and reality itself. So I would say, like, the biggest challenge in our social change movements is we want to be good. We want to be good. And for us to be good, someone else has to be bad. I do not want to be good. I want to be human. I want to be myself. And I am extremely limited, flawed, right? I make mistakes all the time. And I want to be in relationship with other humans who know that they're human and are struggling to bring out the best in ourselves. Right. And if we can do that, if we can give ourselves and each other the space for that, right? And boundaries, right? Because the other thing is like, oh, wait, right? Boundaries for myself. I need to step out of this space. This is not healthy for me. Or this person needs to step out of the circle right now because what you're bringing into the circle is not helpful. So we're going to step out and we're going to talk about that. Right. But we're not like we're not like you're not, we're still in relationship. And the person that you just triggered is not the person who's going to help take you out of the room to sit down with you to talk about what's going on with you. Because those boundaries, right? So these are the practices of beloved community. It's a messy, and it's and things would be so much easier if there were good guys and bad guys, and the good guys could just like defeat the bad guys. That would, I love Marvel movies, and I love, and I'm glad the Spider-Man was like, oh, hey, no, let's let's do therapy with all of my enemies across the multiverse. So like, yeah, that's good. Let's go going in the right direction. Therapy with Dr. Octopus. Like, yes, he's a part of beloved community too. So I'm being silly, but I'm not, but I'm serious. So anyway. Good
But I want
question.
to ask you a question about that, because Taj, you laid down some like serious Yoda like wisdom there of like the default to the paradox and complexity.
Yes.
Like, it was the wheel and all the webs, and it was beautiful. But what do we do when we are in organizations and we are coming up against seemingly really bad things like ICE and detention and prisons and things that we're like, gosh, that seems really bad. And not that we're good, but how do we navigate that destruction and serious binary?
Yeah. So does anyone know what this is? It's the symbol for Mauna Kea. Does anyone know about the struggle around Mauna Kea? It is a sacred mountain for the Hawaiian people. And there was a struggle going on between the Hawaiian people and folks who wanted to put more telescopes onto their sacred mountain. And on that mountain, a set of things unfolded. It was sort of a kind of a gathering of protectors who went onto the mountain and spent many months there to prevent the seeding of this new telescope, right? And what's interesting about the practice, like the transformational practice of people who are rooted in deep cultural values, right? And in this case, the core value, it was this concept of kapu aloha. So everyone's heard the concept of aloha. Aloha is love. It is many things. But this notion of kapu aloha was very much about like when you are confronted with the violence of the state, right? And you are nose to nose and face to face with it, right? You stand firm. You stand in your dignity. You are unmoved and unmovable. And those police officers who are facing you, when it's time to eat, you bring them a plate, because that's what we do in our community. We feed our people. And even though you are facing me, an agent of the state, and I am here, a protector of the sacred and a protector of the land, when it's time to eat, I bring you a plate. And we'll eat together, face to face, in this confrontation, unmoved and unmovable. That is kapu aloha. So, and as I tell the story, I can feel there's a really beautiful film on this which I can share you, and you can sort of see this confrontation, right? And there's that image from the Movement for Black Lives of that nurse who's sort of standing so regally facing those police officers with their shields and their batons in her dignity, without fear, with full courage, facing the violence of the state, unmoved and unmovable. That is the when you the only way to do that is to be in relationship to what is true. That's like satyagraha. That's soul force. That's soul power. That is the power that is greater than any baton or any gun, right? Because you are facing that violence without fear and with love. It's a lot to ask. And we have gotten ourselves into a position as a species where it may be that is our only path to a future. We have to find that in ourselves, right? And tonight I'm going to be spending time with Mike Brown's father, who's here in the community, having some talks and spending time with people. And last night there was a showing of the film about Ferguson, which if you have not seen, you should see. Because like our people, we as a people, like all of us have that capacity in us. And those who are called, right? We can nurture and support those kinds of acts of courage and love. So yeah, I think we are in like a verdant moment where you can look a lot of places and see what it looks like to kind of stand unapologetically against the violence of the state and hold everyone's humanity as sacred in those acts, right? And to be to let our like grief and pain and rage at the injustice of the violence that continues and has occurred to be expressed publicly, but in a way that diminishes no one's humanity. And that's the simple task.
Sorry. That's a wrap. That's it. That we got.
Easy peasy lemon squeezy, right? Yeah, no, that's the thing about the things we have to do. Like, because the thing about the 4 elements of this and the 3 elements of that, when we started, there were like 35 elements, 50 elements, and this diagram and that. It's like things seemed very complicated. Like, oh, we got to do this, we got to do this, and what about this, and what about this, and like, and I have a lot of complicated diagrams that I can show you. Of like, here's how you build cultural power, and here's how cultural power, political power, and economic power interact. And here in a systems change transformation, like I have a lot of like diagrams and models and case studies that are very complicated. Because anyway, they're fun to look at. They're still kind of useful sometimes, but what we need to do is kind of like pretty basic and extremely difficult because it requires that we confront ourselves and our fears and how we've been impacted and the trauma that we carry that is epigenerational and that is in our family and that we directly experience and that we experience as communities. And this is the thing about the power and pain intersection. Like we have to heal. Right? To find our power, to uncover our power. There's no other way to do it. So, and we got to do that together and have some fun doing it, and eat good food and laugh and dance and nap and go like join the nap ministry church. Nap ministry is like you know, there's so much wisdom in that ministry. I could go on and on for days about the genius of the Nat ministry. Because it interrupts all of these patterns in the dominant culture that, you know, if you interrupt those patterns, the dominant culture just starts to collapse in on itself, right? Because we have to participate in it for it to reproduce itself. And when we stop participating, it starts to fall apart, which is good, but we have to then in that space be creating the new, right? Because as bad as things are, from my view, like all of these bad things are kind of falling in on themselves under the weight of their own contradictions, as we like to say, without even much help from us. Like we don't have to make it fall apart. It's falling apart pretty well all by itself. The question is, can we build community? Can we build relationship? Can we build ways of life that are alternatives to what's collapsing? Which is kind of how I spend a lot of my time now. Yes.
Can I play devil's advocate really quick?
Yeah.
It's beautiful. I love your work. I'm a huge fan, and I'm like in total alignment. Today, it took me. I'm 43 years old. It took me like 25 years to like arrive at a more like peaceful, joyful place. And it took a lot of healing, of different healing modalities, right? So I really value and appreciate your work, but there's also like the little, right? It's not binary. It's not like, you know, because I oftentimes I'm still activated by harm, right? Whether it's institutional, like the Pitzer institution as staff, or as even just like a person walking down the street, I can be triggered by whatever. I have enough practice. So this kind of will loop back to your question, Elsie, is for me, I noticed once I'm already, my lid is flipped, I cannot resource at that.
Yeah.
It becomes very difficult. So this is where the practice has paid off for me, right? Where, oh, like if I am in practice when I'm not activated and it isn't hard and I'm just calm and full of life and self and joy, when I get trigger activated, there's a little bit more spaciousness to sometimes not flip my lid and be like, oh, shoot, I'm getting to the point where I need to resource outside of this container. And so then but it is a lot of like personal practice. And I'm not trying to make that individual, but I also want to make sure that this is like, you know, these are very hard concepts, but very simple tools. But they're very difficult to practice and embody. And I want to just be careful. It's not like this, you know, oh, like let's just all kumbaya together in some, no, this is like very hard, personal, engaging work. And there's been times where I've had to like show up in my rage, and show up and there's been beloved community to hold that for me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
A lot of that personal healing too has been a lot of like cultural reconnection, because I felt like I didn't have a culture. I was like American, and I lost a lot of the identity. So like that reconnection to my culture was very important, because then I learned different ways of existing. And then you can practice like nonviolence in a different way. So I just want to name that this is not like something that you can just like decide like, oh, I mean, you do, but it's like the application of this work is, I feel like it's a life journey. And then also it's very scary. At least that was my experience. It was very scary and very hard. And I have to, you know, Tess and I were talking about it this morning. I have to incorporate these practices because without them, whatever they are, find whatever works for you. If it's dancing, meditating, singing, whatever. I found that if I practice those things in the moments, I have more space. But it's not this like let's just all kind of kumbaya and like get past it. It's very hard work, but it's beautiful work because the payoff is a whole other level too. Because you don't only experience like community healing. There's a lot of healing that I've received in personal relationships and with myself. So I'm like such a fan. So I wanted to touch on that because like, it's a 1 hour conversation and like the meat of what you're like, I've read his work and it sometimes takes me a couple hours to go in, but it's so deep and beautiful and very valuable to this work. So I really feel like I'm very inspired. I'm a big fan girl and just so interesting. Sorry, I just wanted to say that because I want to make sure that we're not like also like I don't want to bypass this work, right? Like I don't want to pretend that it's like, oh, like let's just, and I know and I'm not saying or implying that you are saying that. I just wanted to name that.
Actually, amen. No, I feel you, really feel you. Thank you for offering that. And yeah. I mean, it's yeah, I think that some aspect of what I really feel and what you're saying is just like one way to think about the challenge is like, can I allow myself to just be myself, right? If I'm sad, be sad. If I'm mad, be mad. If I'm angry, be angry. If I'm joyful, be joyful, right? Like giving ourselves permission to just be however we are, right? And I may do that with you. I may do that somewhere else, but like, can I just give myself permission to just experience what I'm experiencing? Because we're not given a lot of permission to do that, where it's like, oh, be this way so that I'm okay. Be this way so that you fit into this. Be this way so, yeah, it's hard. It's a lot of unlearning. Yeah.
More questions or comments? I have a question. There, come close.
Hi. I'm just, well, I don't know. Okay.
You can't be seen.
Yeah. Okay. So I was wondering, I'm on our college soccer team and we do meetings like this of restorative justice and like social justice within the realm of sports. And I was just wondering, we do have girls on the team. I think that this work is important, but with them, they believe that it doesn't have a place on like a soccer team or a sports team. And so I think like the coaches and also teammates have really struggled with their participation during our meetings. And I guess, what is one way that you find helpful when trying to motivate individuals who don't want or like don't see the need for it or have like a completely different, maybe like political view in a sense? Yeah, I was just wondering like what your thoughts of that is. Also, I'm Anjali. It's very nice to meet you. Hi.
Meet you, Anjali. Great question. Grew up a soccer player and both my kids are soccer players and have a great love for the beautiful game. So to go back to the first element, which is like, why are you playing soccer? And not just you, but like, why are we playing soccer? Do we actually have a compelling, clear, and bold sense of our shared vision and purpose? Like, why are we doing this? Because if you don't have a shared why, it's hard to build a shared how. Right? Because like, are we doing this to just like defeat and vanquish our opponents? Are we doing this so that we can as individual players like grow our skills and become more effective at what we do? Are we doing this to learn a set of lessons for life? Like, why are we doing this? And what you'll find in any organization, whether it's a soccer team, a classroom, or a university, is that people are not aligned on the vision and the purpose. People have different purposes, and those purposes are in conflict, right? And then the conflicts play out in relationship to those conflicting purposes. So the work of like community building is like, can we get really clear why we're here, right? And does everyone understand why we're here? And I'm a Warrior fan, and you hear, if you watch the Warriors and listen to Steve Kerr, Bay Area basketball, he often talks about like, why did we lose today? We weren't playing with a sense of purpose. Like the team didn't understand, like it had a shared sense of like what we were trying to do. And that's why we did not win the game, right? So, and for what's interesting for you as a student in a hierarchical structure in which there is the coaches on top and then the students on the bottom, right? Or the players on the bottom, right? You say, okay, in that kind of arrangement, it is the responsibility, the role and the task of the coach to know why you're doing what you're doing and to help the team build a shared sense of that. When that is not the case, and sometimes you have to sort of, as they say, lead from below to organize your peers to say, hey, like, who's doing the work out here? They're standing on the sidelines yelling at us. We're the ones out here running our butts off. We're the ones laboring in this factory, right? We're the workers. Let's organize. Why are we here? Why are you here? Why are you here? Why are you here? Why are you here? And what do we need from each other? How do we need to support each other so that each of us can bring our best towards our shared purpose and our shared vision? That's why vision is first, because if you don't have that, it's really, really hard to align people's individual and collective behavior in relationship to that clear shared vision and purpose. And when there's a you might be like, oh, actually in this sometimes what happens in an organization is like, you've got two organizations trying to be one organization. There's two different purposes and people are pulling the organization in two opposite directions at the same time and fighting about it all the time. And I come in, I'm like, okay, I think you guys are two organizations. Just you do this, everyone's going to be a lot happier. But if you spend all of your energy pulling against each other at cross purposes, you're not going to go this way or this way. You're just going to go nowhere because the energy cancels itself out. And that can happen on a soccer team, in a classroom, in a university, in a worker-owned cooperative. Doesn't matter what the structure is, right? So anyway, that's a few little thoughts about what you're grappling with. And like, the other place you can go is values, right? Like you may not have a shared purpose, but do you have shared values? Does everyone here need to feel safe? Does everyone here need to feel respected? Does everyone here need to feel supported to do their best, right? If you have a set of agreed on values, you can align group behavior in relationship to those agreed on values, right? Even if we don't know why we're doing it, we know that like, we don't want anyone on our team to feel like they're not an essential part of the team. That is a value, right? So what are the values around which you are organizing your culture and your practice? Yeah. Is that helpful at all, or just so obvious as to be like, why do we call this guy in to tell us such obvious things? Hopefully it's, again, simple, but hard, right? That's what this work is. It's very simple, and it's a lot of emotion, a lot of labor involved in doing simple, hard things. Yeah.
Roger, do you have a hard stop at 12 or 12:15?
Let me see. Let me look at my
Because I would love for you to tell us a little bit more. You started with your journey of how you got here and how you got to where you
know, I have another half an hour. So 12:15, 12:30, that's my, 12:30 is my hard stop. Yeah.
Okay, so we have with the class until 12:15, and then I'm going to take you aside for the last 15 minutes. I already told them about the anthology. They all know what we're working on here. So one of our questions is, how did you get from this work in transformative movement building and then into capital? And then how do you transform capital to serve the needs of this work that usually the world of finance in a capitalist model is not going to be putting time aside for the healing, caring practices that we're talking about that it takes to move and towards the transformation on the structural level?
Yeah. So I talked a little bit before about like the work of movement building or organizing is generally viewed as like a power building project. So if you go into a movement space and you say, okay, we're building power. The question might be, okay, well, what for? Why are you building power? Power to do what? And to do the thing you want to do, what kind of power do you need to build? What kind of power are you building? Right? So it might be like, oh, we are building the power to stop the state from putting a telescope on our sacred mountain. Well, how are you building that power? Like, what are the forms of power you're deploying to achieve that goal? Right? And generally I'll generally call it like the nonprofit industrial complex, which is social change movements that are resourced primarily by philanthropy. The focus of social change philanthropy is primarily about building political power, which is like, oh, we're going to change these laws, we're going to change these policies, or we're going to get these people elected or get them out of office, right? Political power, the power to change the rules. And then movements and philanthropy are like, well, we can't change the rules unless we change people, unless we change the story, unless we change the narrative, unless we change hearts and minds. So we need to build cultural power, because you have to have cultural power to actually have political power, right? The third core component of power is economic power. And philanthropy doesn't really like to give people money to focus on economic power building, because philanthropy is an arm of Wall Street. And so economic power is about the control of land and assets, which is why if you think about like decolonizing from the colonial process, like how did this system get created, right? You come in and you steal people's land, you enslave other people to work for free for hundreds of years on the land that you've stolen. You make sure that no one can speak there. You make sure that certain people can't read. You make sure that certain people can't speak their languages or have access to their culture, right? Because if you have access to your language and culture, then you have spiritual cultural power. If that's cut off from you, because then you don't know who you are. And if you don't know who you are very easy to manipulate and control, because someone's going to tell you who you are, and they're going to tell you what to do, and you're going to do what they tell you to do, because you don't know who you are, because you've been severed from your relationship to your land, your culture, your values, your history. That's the process of colonialism and racial capitalism, right? And then you build a whole economy with the wealth generated from that, a whole, like, right? So that's what happened. So to make the world better, you have to undo all of those things, which means you have to give the land back to the people from whom it was stolen. And you have to pay for the labor that was extracted from people for free without their consent. And then you have to build an economic system on an energy system that's not based on like destroying the climate system so that life on Earth can exist. So you have to undo the energy part of the industrial society. You just have to undo all the things that were done. And then from there, in the process of doing that, you're taking those resources to build the new, right? So power, right? So the thing that I was like realizing, because I was doing a lot of work with movements around spiritual power, knowing who you are, the power that transcends space and time, cultural power, political power. But I was like, oh, if communities don't have economic power, they don't really have power, because you need integrated power, political, cultural, economic, rooted in, I know who I am. Like, I know who I am because I know my ancestors. I have responsibility to my ancestors and responsibility to descendants. And I understand my place in the web of life. I know who I am. Right? And if you know who you are, right, then that's a lot of power. If you don't know who you are, you got to figure out who you are. And that's an individual and collective process. So movements need to build economic power. What is economic power? Control of creativity, land, labor, and capital. If you don't have control of creativity, land, labor, and capital, you don't have economic power. So we're working on getting Indigenous people their land back. We're working on reparations for people who've been, who've had their labor stolen and who need compensation for the labor that was stolen from their ancestors. And like, if you look at the economic system that we have, the system of the extractive economic system we have, is a product in some ways of an extractive financial system. We have a financial system that produces an extractive financial system that produces an extractive economic system and reproduces it. If you want to have a restorative and regenerative economy, a circular economy, a feminist economy, a donut economy, an indigenous economy, you need a financial system that exists at the scale of that regenerative economy. You need, because energy is energy, water is water, capital is energy that must flow like water. So if you've ever read the Tao Te Ching and you're like, oh, were these old Chinese people so interested in water? Why did they think water was like the most powerful and cool element in the universe? Because they knew that water is life, but water has all of these like principles that are the principles of life. And if you live your life like water, then you will be a part of the flow of regenerative life. You will be one with the flow of regenerative life. You will be one with the Tao, right? Water is the way of understanding how to be at one with life in its evolving complexity, right? So what if capital had the spirit of water? Water flows to the low places. Water flows to the low places. When water is circulating in your body, there's health. When it's not circulating, then there's disease and dysfunction and death, right? Capital not circulating, disease, dysfunction, death. Circulating, life, right? It's so the work that I'm doing now is very much about like reorganizing all of our relationships to the flow of that water so that it flows, so that we have an economy that's for life, not a death economy. Like we have an economy, we have a death culture created by a death cult, created by the lie of separation and supremacy. Supremacy. Yes, separation supremacy. Lie of separation supremacy. We are not separate and nothing is above everything else. Everything's alive, everything's connected, everything's interdependent. That's biology, that's physics, that's just the actual nature of actual reality. We live in a story that is in contradiction to the actual nature of reality. And if you build a whole global civilization around a lie, that civilization will collapse in about, well, the lie started 5,000 to 10,000 years ago because humans are separate from nature and above nature, and humans are male and nature is female. And humans are subject and nature is object. And objects are not sacred. Objects are things that subjects can dominate, control. Separation, supremacy. Then 500 years ago, it's like, oh, humans are male and white, and nature is female and non-white. And so the people who are closest in the racial hierarchy to nature can be dominated by those who are closest to God, because God has given us dominion over nature as the subjects over the object. That's the story. Separation, supremacy, scarcity. Separation, supremacy, scarcity. Scarcity too comes out of, because scarcity is a product of the lie of separation and supremacy. Because as Gandhi said, there's more than enough for everyone's need, not enough for a few people's greed. That's what Gandhi said. And Gandhi was right. He was right about a lot of things. He was right about that. Yes. So that's the collapsing worldview, the collapsing colonial worldview. And then we have an emerging ecological worldview, re-emerging indigenous worldview, in which like, oh, every indigenous community, like culture ever in history was like, no, things are not, we are it. Everything is us, and we are, and you are everything, and everything is you. You are everything, and everything is you. Right? Every indigenous culture ever, like that's the facts of reality. And then someone stupid person like 5,000 to 10,000 years ago was like, no, we are not nature. We are separate from nature. And she is going to do all the work. And I'm going to sit back and watch. That was the stupidest idea in the history of humanity because it metastasized. So anyway, yeah. So why am I focused on capital, right? Is because we need to build arcs and villages and places for people to weather the storm. Sanctuaries. As everything collapses, where people can come together and be good to each other.
Wow, that was so much.
Oh,
That was like a history, political, economic, social, cultural lesson of our lives. So, and slam poetry, yeah. Slam poetry. That was so much. I feel like I'm gonna watch this recording about 10 more times.
I was thinking that.
And just to say, I have poems about everything I've said. There's like a poem that goes with it. So if you want to read them, most of them are on Facebook. I know that's only where old people are, so none of you are on Facebook, but
Of course,
yes, 'cause we're the old people on Facebook. And they're like, no.
I do think that.
well, we'll do an old person thing and like download them from Facebook and connect them with your video and we'll put them all up to share with everyone so we can keep relishing because these ideas, they're so the opposite of everything that we've been taught that we have to, the power of the reiteration and the repetition of this new narrative is landing in our hearts and our brains and our souls through that poetry is so critical and in our bodies, right? We also have to learn how to dance into it and sweat and be in ceremony with it. So thank you so much, Taj. It was just such a gift. So beautiful.
Thank you.
Good to be with all of you. And just so much gratitude that like not all students, let's just say, are in this classroom right here and are as passionate about the things that you're passionate about. And I think just know that it matters. It really makes a difference that you care about the things that you care about and you're doing the hard work that you're doing, because you don't have to do that. You can just be like, hey, I'm just going to go do some things and make some money and like make it, I'm just make it easy on myself. And you're not the ones, you're not the ones. Like, you're like, no, things need to be different. And I want to figure that out. And I want to figure that with other people. And that, like, that whole cliche of like, you're in a school that draws a lot of students who have that commitment, which is wonderful, but like, it really matters. It really makes a difference. And just those of you around this table, like if you put your minds and hearts and hands to something, things that have been the same for a very long time can be very different. It can, right? In your lifetime, in other lifetimes, like I'm harvesting fruit that my ancestors planted generations ago, right? And others will harvest some of the fruit that I'm planting now, right? And so when we kind of just experience ourselves in that longer arc, that's one of the things that can make the work a little lighter as we do it together. So thank you for being you. Y'all are amazing. This is great.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Guys, don't get off yet. They're all gonna leave. I'm gonna come back to you in 1 minute, so I'll be right there.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
I stopped the recording.
Yes, and do you mind sitting with it? Taj, I'll be right back there. Yes, 1 minute. Thanks, Jessica and Aloha and everyone for joining us. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Ciao, ciao. Till next time.
I'll send her an email or text.
For Scarlett?
Yeah, for the bi-weekly, because we missed it.
Just talk to her directly, because I gotta go.
Hey, Taj.
Hey,
Oh, that was so magnificent. Oh, gosh.
should we still be recording this or?
I think we're stopped.
Okay,
Is it still?
it says it's blinking on my end.
Stop